There are people who doubt everything: politics, media, even themselves. But never their religion. Not after scandals, not after contradictions, not after decades of unanswered prayers. So the question isn't, is religion true? It's far more unsettling than that. Why do some people never leave, even when belief costs them peace, freedom, or truth? The answer isn't stupidity, it isn't ignorance, and it definitely isn't just fear of hell. It's something quieter, something psychological, something that locks in place long before logic ever shows up. And once you see it, you'll never look at belief the same way again. Belief isn't about God, it's about safety. Let's start here, because this is where most conversations about religion quietly go wrong. People assume belief begins with questions, with curiosity, with investigation. But for most believers, that was never the entry point. Belief didn't arrive as a conclusion, it arrived as a condition of safety. It showed up before language was fully formed, before critical thinking existed, before the brain even knew how to separate itself from the world around it. Most people don't believe because they examined reality and chose a worldview. They believe because belief was present when they were small, dependent, and completely exposed. Religion was not presented as an idea to evaluate. It was the environment itself. It was the air in the room. It was the tone of voice at bedtime, the rituals around meals, the stories told with warmth and certainty. It came bundled with approval, with smiles, with hugs, with a sense that everything was under control and watched over. In those early years, the brain is not asking whether something is true, it is asking whether something is safe. And religion answers that question immediately. It says, you are protected, you are seen, you belong, there is order here, and you are inside it. That association wires itself deep into the nervous system. So when belief is challenged later in life, something strange happens. You are not just questioning a concept, you are not just testing a claim, you are activating a threat response. The body reacts before the mind can explain why. Heart rate shifts, muscles tense, a subtle panic appears. Because to the brain, losing belief feels like losing shelter. It feels like being exposed again, small again, unprotected in a world that suddenly has no guarantees. And the brain has one job in moments like that: protect the shelter. It does not ask whether the shelter is accurate. It asks whether it is familiar and stabilizing. So it defends belief the same way it would defend a home in a storm, instinctively, aggressively, even against evidence, even against truth. And this is where belief stops being philosophical and becomes biological. And once belief lives in the nervous system, logic alone will never be enough to remove it. But this is only the first layer. Because underneath safety, something even more powerful is waiting. The brain confuses meaning with truth. Humans like to imagine themselves as truth seekers, but that is not how the mind actually works. Truth is slow, it is uncomfortable. It often leaves questions open longer than we would like. Meaning, on the other hand, is immediate. It soothes. It organizes chaos into something that feels manageable, and the brain is drawn to that relief long before it is drawn to accuracy. We do not crave truth first. We crave meaning. We want the world to make sense emotionally, not just logically. Religion understands this at a deep psychological level. It does not wait for questions to arise. It arrives early with ready-made answers. Why we are here, why suffering exists, why death is not the end. These answers are not offered tentatively. They are delivered with confidence, rhythm, and repetition. And that matters more than we like to admit. The brain is deeply uncomfortable with open loops. An unanswered question creates tension, like a song that never resolves its final note. That tension lingers in the body. Religion removes it instantly. Not through evidence, but through certainty. It closes the loop. It says, this is the answer, and you can rest now. And rest feels good, relief feels good, safety and clarity feel good. Here is the critical mistake the mind makes. It confuses the feeling of relief with the presence of truth. Because something feels calming, it feels correct. Because it reduces anxiety, it feels reliable. Over time, that emotional signal becomes the proof. The belief feels true because it stabilizes the inner world, not because it has been tested against reality. So when doubt appears later, it does not feel like curiosity or exploration. It feels like a rupture, like the return of chaos, like the floor becoming unstable. The mind reacts quickly and defensively. It says, "Go back, do not open that door. You know where this leads." Not because the doubt is dangerous, but because uncertainty is. And this is the quiet trap. Once meaning has replaced truth as the primary goal, questioning becomes a threat instead of a tool. The belief is no longer there to explain reality, it is there to regulate emotion. And beliefs that regulate emotion are protected far more fiercely than beliefs that simply describe the world. But this confusion between meaning and truth is only part of the mechanism, because once belief starts shaping how you see yourself, walking away becomes even harder. And that is where the trap tightens. Identity fusion, when belief becomes me. At some point, belief stops being something you hold and quietly becomes something you are. It shifts from a worldview into an identity. The language changes without you noticing. It is no longer "I believe this." It becomes "I am this." I am a Christian, I am a Muslim, I am a believer. And once that shift happens, the rules completely change. Because now, the belief is no longer external. It is not an idea you can examine from a distance. It lives inside your sense of self. It sits next to your name, your family, your memories, your place in the world, and that is where the danger begins. If a belief is just a belief, being wrong is uncomfortable. If a belief is your identity, being wrong feels annihilating. Because if the belief collapses, something else collapses with it. Your story, your past choices, your sense of being a good person who lived a meaningful life. Questioning the belief now feels like an attack on your entire existence. It feels like saying your parents were wrong when they taught you what mattered most. It feels like saying your community was wrong when it welcomed you, guided you, and praised you for your faith. It feels like saying your sacrifices were unnecessary, that the guilt you carried, the fears you obeyed, the desires you suppressed, were all for nothing. The mind does not experience this as a philosophical exercise. It experiences it as a threat, and this is where the ego steps in. The ego is not interested in what is true. It is interested in what keeps you intact. Its job is survival, not accuracy. So it draws a hard line and says, if this belief falls, I fall. If this story breaks, everything breaks. From that moment on, evidence becomes an enemy. Questions become attacks. Doubt becomes betrayal. Not because the arguments are weak, but because the cost of accepting them feels unbearable. The ego protects the belief the same way it would protect a vital organ, automatically, without negotiation. And the most powerful part of this fusion is that it feels virtuous. Defending belief feels like defending yourself, your family, your history, your worth. Walking away no longer feels like growth. It feels like erasing yourself. But even this is not the full picture, because identity alone is not what keeps people locked in place. There is another force pressing from the outside, reinforcing the fear, making sure the belief never loosens its grip, and that force is far less forgiving. Social punishment is stronger than hell. People often assume that fear of hell is what keeps believers obedient and loyal. That idea sounds dramatic, but it misses something far more immediate and far more human. Hell is abstract. It is distant. It exists somewhere after death. Social loss, on the other hand, is here and now, and it hurts in ways the brain is finely tuned to avoid. Social punishment is more powerful than cosmic punishment because it is real. It happens in real time. Leaving belief often means losing family dinners where you once felt welcome. It means awkward silences where laughter used to be. It means friends who stop calling, not out of cruelty, but out of discomfort. It means respect quietly evaporating as people start to see you as broken, dangerous, or lost. For many believers, religion is not just a set of ideas. It is a tribe. It defines who is safe, who is trustworthy, and who belongs. When you leave the belief, you do not just change your mind, you step outside the circle, and humans are not wired to handle that lightly. We evolved in small groups where exile was a death sentence. To be cast out meant no protection, no shared resources, no future. That ancient wiring is still active. The brain reacts to social rejection with the same alarm signals as physical pain. So when someone considers leaving belief, the question is not framed as what is true. It becomes something far more personal and frightening. Is truth worth being alone? For many people, the answer is no. Not because they are weak, not because they are dishonest, but because the cost feels unbearable. They stay not because they are fully convinced, but because leaving would dismantle their entire social world, their support system, their sense of place. And the cruel irony is that this pressure rarely has to be spoken out loud. A raised eyebrow, a disappointed tone, a warning about disappointing the family, that is enough. The message is clear. Believe or lose us. So, belief becomes a form of social survival, a membership fee paid in certainty. And as long as the tribe rewards belief and punishes doubt, walking away will always feel like stepping into isolation. But even social pressure is not the deepest hook, because beneath fear of rejection lies something even harder to confront. The fear that leaving belief would force you to face your own life without the story that gave it meaning. And that is where the resistance becomes almost absolute. Doubt threatens the story of a good life. Imagine reaching the later half of your life and having a single thought land with full weight. What if the moral compass that guided every major decision was built on something untrue? Not partially flawed, not misinterpreted, but fundamentally mistaken. Sit with that for a moment. This is not an abstract worry. It is a deeply personal reckoning. Think about what that would mean. The sacrifices you made in silence, the desires you suppressed because they were labeled wrong, the guilt you carried for thoughts you never acted on, the fear that shaped your choices, your relationships, your sense of what kind of person you were allowed to be. Now imagine realizing that much of it was optional, that the rules were not written into reality itself, but inherited and enforced. That realization is not just uncomfortable, it is devastating. It threatens the coherence of your entire life story, because we all need to believe that our suffering meant something, that our restraint was noble, that our sacrifices were necessary. Without that meaning, the past begins to feel like a loss instead of a virtue. So, the mind does something very clever, something quiet and protective. It reframes the belief without abandoning it. It says even if it is not literally true, it is still good. It still teaches morality. It still gives people structure. It still kept me on the right path. In that moment, belief shifts categories. It is no longer judged by accuracy. It is judged by usefulness. This is a crucial psychological move. Truth becomes secondary to emotional stability. The belief is allowed to remain not because it describes reality correctly, but because removing it would destabilize the story of a good life. And once belief is justified by its utility, it becomes almost impossible to touch. Any challenge can be dismissed with the same defense. It works. It helped me. It made me who I am. Here is the paradox. The belief no longer needs to be true to survive. It only needs to be comforting. And when comfort becomes the standard, questioning feels not just unnecessary, but cruel. Why disturb something that seems to have held everything together? But this creates a quiet tension that never fully goes away. Because deep down, usefulness is not the same as truth, and the mind knows it. Which is why doubt does not disappear. It waits. And when it returns, it does not ask gentle questions. It asks whether a life built on comfort can ever fully feel honest. Religion trains you to distrust your own thinking. Many belief systems share a quiet but powerful lesson that is taught long before it is ever stated directly. Your mind is flawed. Your instincts are unreliable. Your doubts are dangerous. Questioning is not curiosity, it is temptation. And once this lesson is absorbed, it changes how a person relates to their own thoughts. When critical ideas begin to surface, they are not examined with openness. They are shut down almost automatically, not because they have been proven wrong, but because they feel forbidden. The emotional response comes first, a flicker of guilt, a sense of unease, a warning signal that says, this line of thinking is unsafe, and that signal is enough. Over time, this creates internal censorship. You no longer need an external authority to tell you what not to think. You learn to interrupt yourself. You redirect your attention. You replace questions with rehearsed answers. The belief system does not need to argue its case because the argument never fully begins. This is one of the most effective forms of control because it feels voluntary. It feels like loyalty. It feels like faith. In reality, it is conditioning. The mind learns to distrust its own capacity to reason and to elevate obedience above understanding. Thinking becomes something that must stay within approved boundaries. And the system becomes incredibly stable. A belief defended from the outside can still be challenged. A belief defended from the inside becomes self-sustaining. You do not need a preacher standing over you. You become the preacher. You become the guard. You enforce the rules quietly, even in private, even when no one is watching. This is why arguments rarely work. Facts bounce off. Logic slides away. The threat is not the information itself, but the act of allowing oneself to think freely. Because free thinking has been framed as a moral failure rather than an intellectual one. But something still slips through. Doubt does not disappear completely. It cannot. It shows up in moments of silence, in private thoughts, in questions that arise uninvited. And when it does, it creates tension between what you are allowed to think and what you actually feel. That tension is dangerous to the system, because it reminds the mind of something it was taught to forget, that thinking is not a sin, and that fear is not the same as truth. Doubt never disappears. It just goes quiet. Here is the truth, almost no one says out loud. Most lifelong believers do experience doubt, not once, not briefly, but repeatedly, over years. The difference is not the absence of doubt. It is what they do the moment it appears. They rarely let it finish a sentence. The thought begins to form, and something moves quickly to interrupt it. A prayer is spoken, a familiar verse is repeated, a ritual is performed. The mind returns to rhythm and certainty before the question can sharpen. Doubt is not debated, it is drowned out. This is not accidental. Silence is dangerous to a belief system built on certainty. Silence creates space. Space invites reflection, and reflection can lead somewhere that cannot be undone. Once a question is fully formed and honestly examined, it changes the internal landscape. The system knows this, even if the person does not consciously articulate it. So belief becomes maintenance rather than discovery. It is about upkeep, not exploration. Repetition replaces inquiry. Comfort becomes the goal instead of understanding. Stability is valued more than truth. The belief is not there to explain the world more clearly. It is there to keep the inner world from shaking. This is why doubt often appears at night, or in moments of emotional vulnerability, or during personal crisis. It slips through when the routines falter. And when it does, it feels dangerous not because it is false, but because it threatens the structure that has kept everything orderly. Most of the time, the system holds. Doubt is quieted. Life continues. But then something unexpected happens. Someone else leaves. Not a stranger, but a friend, a sibling, a respected member of the community. And they do not collapse. They do not fall apart. They do not become lost or immoral. They survive. They think. They even seem lighter. And that observation is deeply unsettling, because it introduces a new possibility that cannot be easily erased. Maybe doubt is not destruction. Maybe questioning does not lead to ruin. Maybe the fear was exaggerated. That single example can shake years of conditioning, because it proves something the system depends on denying. That belief is not the only way to live. And once that realization enters the mind, doubt does not need to shout anymore. It just waits. The real reason people stay forever. So, why do people stay religious forever? Not for the reason most assume, not because every doubt has been resolved or every question answered. Most people are not endlessly convinced. They are emotionally committed, and that commitment is rooted in something far deeper than belief itself. Leaving requires something rare, the willingness to grieve, not in a symbolic way, but in a deeply human one. To grieve the story that once explained everything. The story that said your life had a clear purpose, that suffering was part of a plan, that someone was watching and keeping score. Letting that go feels like losing a map in the middle of the night. It also requires grieving an identity, the version of yourself that knew who they were in the world. the version that belonged without question. When belief has been part of your name for decades, walking away feels like becoming a stranger to yourself. That loss is quiet, but it cuts deep. And then there is the grief of certainty. Few things are as comforting as knowing the answers in advance, knowing where you came from, knowing where you are going, knowing what is right and wrong without hesitation. Losing that certainty means standing in ambiguity, and ambiguity demands strength. Most people do not want truth if it comes wrapped in mourning. They do not want to dismantle the story that made their life feel meaningful, especially if that story helped them endure pain. They want peace now, relief now, stability now. Religion offers that peace. It offers it quickly and reliably, even if it is borrowed, even if it comes at the cost of unanswered questions. For many, that trade feels worth it. But once you see this mechanism clearly, it changes how you view belief. You stop seeing lifelong faith as pure conviction. You begin to see it as emotional survival, as a choice made again and again to avoid grief rather than confront it. And that understanding cannot be reversed, because once you recognize that staying is often about avoiding loss, not discovering truth, belief is no longer just a matter of faith. It becomes a mirror. And what you see in it depends on how willing you are to face what would be lost if you walked away. Religion isn't just a belief system. It's a psychological shelter, a meaning machine, a social glue. And for many people, it works, at the cost of curiosity. But the question isn't whether belief comforts you. The question is, what happens when comfort becomes more important than truth? Because growth always begins with discomfort, with uncertainty, with the courage to stand without a script. You don't have to abandon belief, but you do have to examine why you hold it. And whether it's holding you, if this made you pause, if it stirred something you felt but never named, then keep questioning, keep thinking. And if you value truth over comfort, subscribe, because clarity belongs to the brave.